She was sitting on the kitchen floor with her back against the cabinet when I found her. Not on the couch, not at the table. The floor. Like the distance between standing and collapsing had closed faster than she expected, and she'd made a decision somewhere in the middle. She was holding a mug that had gone cold. She didn't look up when the door opened, and then she said, quietly, without drama, the way you say something you've already thought too many times, "I was hoping it would be you." I didn't know what to do with that. I stood in the doorway of her kitchen for a moment longer than was probably normal, while the version of me that makes good decisions tried very hard to say something useful. He failed. So I sat down on the floor beside her instead. My name is Daniel Ford. I'm 34. I install residential flooring for a living. Hardwood, tile, occasionally the kind of luxury vinyl that clients pretend is something else. I own a truck that smells like sawdust and a toolbox that cost more than my couch. I live in apartment 4B. Nora Callahan lives in 4A. She moved in 2 years ago in the middle of October, during a rain that was personal in its intensity. I watched her wrestle a bookshelf through the hallway door from the safety of my own doorway, and I made the mistake of offering to help without first assessing whether the bookshelf had a fixed position in her life or in mine. It took 40 minutes. She gave me a cup of tea afterward that tasted like something from a grandmother's kitchen, bergamot and something warm I couldn't identify. I didn't ask what it was, because asking would have meant staying longer, and I had a job at 6 the next morning. Her name I learned from the building directory. Her coffee order I learned because the cafe downstairs started putting it up when she walked in. Her sense of humor I learned gradually, the way you learn someone else's cat. Cautiously, with a respect for its own timeline. She worked in heritage architecture, restoration. She spent her days diagnosing what was structurally wrong with old buildings and figuring out what they needed to survive. She had a calmness about her that I associated, privately, with women who had done a fair amount of their surviving before the current chapter. She had one prop that traveled with her everywhere in the apartment building, a pale blue enamel mug, the paint worn at the handle. She brought it to her door when she talked to me in the hallway. She carried it to the building's roof on the evenings I knew she went up there to read. The mug was not sentimental in any way she ever explained. It was just always there. The existing dynamic between us was this. We were neighbors who had accidentally become something neither of us had named. I fixed a cabinet hinge for her in February. She left a container of leftover pasta outside my door in March with a note that said only reheats well. I knocked to check on her when her lights were still on at 2 in the morning last winter. She knocked on mine the night I got a call about my father's health and forgot that my own walls are thinner than I remember. We were people who had noticed each other. That was all. That was the story I told myself, with reasonable success, for approximately 22 months. It was a Thursday in late September when everything shifted. Not the kitchen floor, that came later. This was earlier in the evening, when I got home and noticed that her door was slightly open. Not ajar, slightly. The way a door is when someone left in a hurry, or didn't quite have the presence of mind to close it fully. The hallway smelled faintly of something burned, not badly burned, just the ghost of something on a stove. The building was quiet. It was a weekday, mid-evening, and most people in the building were the kind of tired that faces the television. I stood outside my own door with my keys in my hand. Here is the part where I should tell you I knocked. I knocked. She didn't answer. I knocked again and said her name, and the door swung a few inches further open because it had not been latched. And that was when I saw the kitchen light on and heard nothing. Not crying, just nothing, where sound usually is. I pushed the door open enough to look inside, called her name a second time, and walked in. She was on the floor, back against the lower cabinet, knees pulled toward her chest, the pale blue mug held in both hands. She wasn't making any sound when I walked in. Her face was still wet. Her eyes were fixed on something in the middle distance that I couldn't locate, and her expression had the look of a person who had been crying long enough that they'd moved past the active part and into whatever flat, rinsed territory comes after. I had 3 seconds of standing in the doorway before she looked up. She looked at me the way you look at someone when you have already decided you don't have the energy to perform for them. No embarrassment, no reaching for dignity, just me in her kitchen, her on the floor, both of us understanding the situation without briefing. She said quietly, "I was hoping it would be you." I registered that sentence. I understood it was doing something significant. I filed it in the part of my mind that handles things that require attention I am not ready to give immediately, and I sat down on the floor beside her. The tile was cold. She was close enough that I could smell the bergamot from the mug, and something under it that was just her. The apartment smelled like something had been left on the stove too long, and then the stove had been turned off and forgotten. I didn't ask what happened. I didn't ask if she was okay. She was clearly not okay, and I have found that asking people who are clearly not okay whether they are okay is a courtesy that benefits the asker more than the person on the floor. I said, "Do you want more tea? That one's gone cold." She looked at the mug. She almost laughed. It came out wrong, not quite right, but in the direction of right. She said, "The kettle's on the counter." So I got up and made her tea. I found the tin, bergamot, and something called lemon myrtle that I had never heard of, and I made it the way she had made it for me 2 years ago in October, which is to say I guessed and hoped. She was still on the floor when I came back. I handed her the mug and sat down beside her again. We didn't speak for approximately 8 minutes. I know because I watched the light outside the kitchen window shift and did arithmetic. She told me eventually. Not all of it at once, in the way someone tells you a thing when the thing is large and they're not sure yet which pieces belong in the sentence. Her mother had called. There had been a diagnosis. The word was not catastrophic, but it was the kind of word that changes the light in a room even after you've processed it technically, because the mind understands things faster than the body does, and the body takes longer to catch up. She had gotten off the phone and stood at the stove, and the water boiled, and she burned the edge of something she was making, and she turned everything off and sat down on the floor. "I kept thinking someone would come," she said. "That was the strange part. I kept thinking, someone is going to come and make this smaller, and I didn't know who I was imagining." She didn't look at me when she said that. She looked at the mug. "And then I heard you in the hallway," she said, "and I thought, it's him, and I felt better, before you'd even knocked." I want to be clear about what I did with that information. I filed it. I am, in certain emotional situations, a man with a very large and very disorganized filing system and a tendency to keep things stored rather than addressed. I would like to say this is a character flaw I have worked diligently to correct. I would be lying. I said, "I'm glad you heard me." She said, "You always make noise in the hallway. Steel-toed boots. You carry too many things at once. Efficiency." She almost laughed again. This time it came out closer to correct. We stayed on the floor for another 20 minutes. At some point, she leaned her head back against the cabinet and closed her eyes, and I stayed because leaving felt like the wrong geometrical choice given the angle of things, and she didn't ask me to go. I thought about it for the next 4 days with increasing intensity and decreasing productivity. I was hoping it would be you. I installed 70 square feet of white oak in a kitchen in the neighborhood and managed to lay 2 planks crooked, which I have never done since my 2nd year of working. I ate the same lunch 3 days in a row because I could not generate sufficient interest in variety. My domestic habits were becoming threatening. I told myself it was the circumstances, that she had said it the way anyone says anything when they are frightened and alone and relief arrives. "Thank God, you scared me. I'm glad it's you." These are the things people say when fear releases. They are not confessions. They are involuntary exhales. I was unconvinced by my own argument. Here is the evidence that was accumulating against my case. The night after the kitchen floor, she knocked on my door. She brought me half a walnut cake in a container, the edges still slightly warm, and she said, "I baked because I didn't know what to do with my hands." She looked at me for a moment longer than the transaction required, and then she said goodnight and went back to her apartment. 3 days later, I passed her on the stairs. She was coming up, I was going down, and there was a natural pause where the staircase narrows, She said, "How are you?" in the way she specifically didn't usually ask it. Not as a greeting, as an actual question. Her eyes stayed on me while I answered. When I finished, she nodded and said, "Good," like she had checked something off a list she was keeping privately. The day after that, I heard her on the phone from the hallway, which is not eavesdropping, it is architecture, and heard her say, very clearly, "He just stayed. He didn't make it into anything. He just stayed." And then a pause. And then, "Yes, him." I stood in the hallway for considerably longer than necessary given that I was holding groceries. That is not hiding. It is hiding with better branding. A week after the kitchen floor, she knocked on my door at 11 on a Friday night. She was wearing the kind of clothes that are not designed for other people. Soft, mismatched, the clothes of a person in their own space. And she was holding the pale blue mug. She said, "I couldn't sleep. I kept starting things and not finishing them. Would it be strange if I just sat in your living room for a while?" I told her it would not be strange. She sat on the couch. I made tea. We watched 40 minutes of a documentary about deep-sea geology that neither of us had any particular reason to care about, and it was, inexplicably, the most comfortable I had felt in several weeks. At some point she said, not looking away from the screen, "You never asked me what I was crying about before you came in." I said, "You told me. You didn't ask." "No." She was quiet for a moment. "Most people ask immediately, even when you can see someone needs a minute." "Most people are asking for themselves," I said. "They want to know so they know what to do." I already knew what to do. She turned her head and looked at me. I was watching the screen because a fish of extraordinary improbability had appeared, and I used it as cover. She said, very quietly, "I changed the name in my phone." I looked at her. "When I moved in," she said, "you gave me your number for the building stuff, maintenance, emergencies. You were in there as Daniel Ford, 4B. She paused. "I changed it, about a year ago." "What did you change it to?" She looked back at the screen. The fish had been replaced by a geological formation of some kind. "Something more accurate," she said. "To what?" She didn't answer immediately. Her fingers tightened once around the mug. "Daniel. Just Daniel." A pause. "I stopped putting the 4B back because I liked seeing just your name." That sentence landed in the room the way a certain kind of rain does. Without announcement. Total. I said, "Nora." She said, "You don't have to say anything. I know, I'm sorry, that was probably not—" "Nora." She stopped. "I'm not going to tell you it's fine," I said. "I'm not going to tell you it doesn't matter. Because it does, and I don't think you'd have said it if you didn't want it to." She went still. Not dramatically, just still. I said, "You can take it back if you want. We can watch the geological formation and pretend this didn't happen, and I will still knock on your door, and you will still bring me food in containers, and we will be fine. But if you don't want to take it back—" I stopped. I looked at the mug in her hands, and at the worn enamel at the handle, and at the way her thumb was pressed against the side of it like an anchor. "If you don't want to take it back," I said, "I would like you to know that when something good happened this year, and some things did, you were the first person I wanted to tell. And when things weren't good, you were still the first person. Every time. You, specifically. Not someone. You." She was looking at me now. Her expression was doing something complicated and quiet, the way a face does when a sentence has arrived that it already suspected was coming and did not know how to be ready for. She said, "I was hoping it would be you. That night. I think I've been hoping that for a long time." She didn't say, "I love you." She said something truer. She said she had been choosing me, privately, before she had anyone's permission to. I reached out and I put my hand over hers, over the worn handle of the pale blue mug. She didn't pull away. She turned her hand over and held mine instead. From the hallway, her phone buzzed. We both ignored it. It buzzed again. She picked it up with her free hand, looked at the screen. "My sister," she said, and set it face down on the cushion beside her. "You can answer it," I said. "I will," she said, "in a minute." She didn't move her hand from mine. 3 months later, she stopped apologizing for how the mug looked. That was how I knew something had changed. Not the morning she left a key on my counter, not the evening she reordered dinner because she'd already memorized what I would want. It was the mug. She had been setting it handle first toward herself for as long as I'd known her, the worn side hidden. One morning, she set it on the table between us without thinking, worn side out, and kept talking, and didn't notice until I did. I didn't say anything. I just looked at it. She caught me looking. She rolled her eyes very slightly in the direction that means, don't. I didn't say anything. I was filing it. A year after that, I took on a project 2 streets over, a heritage building, someone's pre-war conversion. The floors original and uneven and in need of careful interpretation. The architect on the project turned out to be Nora. We discovered this simultaneously in a site meeting in front of 4 other people and managed to be completely professional about it for approximately 45 minutes before her project manager noticed we were communicating in a shorthand he couldn't track. He asked afterward how long we'd known each other. Nora said, 2 years. I said, longer than that. She looked at me sideways, the look that means she is deciding whether to argue. She didn't argue. Years later, when people ask how it started, she says, he walked in on me crying on the kitchen floor and made me tea and didn't make it into anything. When they ask what I say, she tells them I say the same thing every time. What I say is, I walked in and she said she was hoping it would be me, so I stayed. Which is accurate, but not complete. The complete version is that I had been hoping, quietly and without much strategy, that it would be me too. I just needed her to say it first, because she was always the braver of the 2 of us, and I have been grateful for that in specific, daily ways ever since. What would you have done if you walked in on someone and they told you they'd been hoping it would be you, before they even explained why? And have you ever realized, too late or just in time, that the person you kept reaching for first was already doing the same thing? Tell me your story in the comments. If this one stayed with you, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.